Instructional material is anything which is used by teachers and learners to facilitate and increase the learning. So, instructional materials provide the basis for what learners will experience and learn. They hold the power to either engage or demotivate learners. Therefore, instructional materials must be carefully planned, selected, organized, refined, and used. The examples of instructional materials includes textbooks, reference books, lesson plans, workbooks, flashcards, charts, and supplemental reading materials. Physical objects, photographs, illustrations, charts, graphs, maps, multimedias, movie, and games.
Now, we will go into our main topic about principle in selecting materials. Instructional materials. We'll be talking about principle. It includes 5 basic principles. But basically, principles in selecting instructional materials includes a lot and various types of principle. But these are 5 principles that we'll be talking about are the most necessary or the most common principle that should be considered when selecting instructional materials or IMs. So first, we have the principle of appropriateness. It says here that IM or instructional materials must be either basic or supplementary to the curriculum. So from its very word, principle of appropriateness, it can tells us that the instructional materials must promote the general and specific goals in the class. It must be appropriate. When we say appropriate, it must be aligned into the intended level, such as the vocabulary capacity of the students or the degree of the difficulty of the concepts. Therefore, it is very important to consider the limits and boundaries of your IMs or your instructional materials. Do not try to do too much in a single course or in a single learning process. Again, instructional materials must be consistent, must with the students' capabilities and learning styles. In a simpler way or in a simpler manner, when we say principle of appropriateness, make instructional materials or select instructional materials that will be consistent or that will hit the learning objectives of your class or of your learning process. Do not cover too much or do not cover less, but just exact or within your learning objectives. Next, we have the principle of authenticity. Principle of authenticity also presents accurate, up-to-date, and dependable information. It has been stated here that the information we provide must be accurate. For example, if we show a picture of a mouse and a lion, the principle of authenticity states that they must be realistic, which means that the mouse cannot be larger than the lion because it would be unrealistic. Another thing that we should consider as a future educator in preparing materials is the color. We must provide the right specific color of our IMs. For example, if we are going to show a picture of a horse, it is necessary that the color of that horse is correct because maybe if a child see a horse in person, they might ask themselves, is that a horse? Is that a horse? The color of the horse is not like that because our teacher showed us that the color of the horse is green. Diba? Dito, it shows that the examples we provide in our instructional materials should be authentic because yun yung paniniwalaan nila, particularly at the elementary level. Kaya, we must provide an authentic and realistic instructional materials. Next principle, we have the principle of cost. So, from the principle of cost, it says that substitute must be considered first. So, from its very word again, principle of cost. The goal of using instructional materials is to have a substitute or is to provide an efficient tools for the students. So, you must find other alternative materials if the materials that you will be using are quite expensive. Since I know we are all aware that there are still schools or places in our country na hindi gaanong civilized. Therefore, we have to take that into consideration as well. Because the cost or prices is one of the most significant variables limiting students to access education, then we will not be use too much expensive things or IMs because we can improvise or we can just use other things or other materials available in the community to use it in our learning process or in our teaching process. And the question to be considered here is, does the material worth its cost, or can a cheaper material be used instead, both in terms of time spent preparing it and in terms of cash value? We must choose the materials with lower cost but not putting at stake its quality and effectiveness. Kung expensive yung gagamitin natin, dapat sulit, dapat worth it. Remember that we are always after what best for our learners.
Principle of interest must stimulate curiosity or satisfy the learner's need to know. It must have the power to motivate, encourage creativity, and imaginative response among users. So, when we present an instructional material na bago pa lang sa paningin ng students, there are a lot of questions of how it works. It makes their mind active instead of passive. As we know that curious people always ask questions and search for answers. That's why students tend to focus on the discussion. As a future educator, knowing and understanding our students' interest will help us to provide them with quality learning opportunities. Siyempre, kung magawa kita instructional materials, ang mga makakatch ang attention sa batit. If then, students can be able to motivate or encourage to participate. And the content na nakapaloob sa instructional material should connected to the topic, so therefore they can truly learn in an effective way with the help of presenting an instructional materials that can get their interest. For example, we as a future elementary educator, mostly ang pwedeng gawin namin is instructional material na colorful when presenting a lesson to catch their interest, to make them focus more on the discussion, which they can encourage to participate and their mind can think critically. Also, we must provide students with opportunities to explore areas they are interested in. Principle of organization and balance must be well organized and well balanced in content. Sabi nga nila, ang sobra ay nakakasama and ang kulang is nakakabitin. So therefore, I believe that in presenting instructional materials should always organize and balance for a student to understand the topic. It's important to note that if we are going to use multimedia, we need to make sure that they are used in strategically and not whimsically. That is, any image used in our instruction should have a specific purpose. Because including multimedia that isn't instructive in nature, such as decorative images in PowerPoints and Word documents, can actually hinder students' ability to retain the information. PPT should be clear and catchy to the eyes, same as sa content na ilalagay natin. The words must be limited but should understandable, and ikaw na teacher ang bahala magpaliwanag upang mas maintindihan pa ng student. The font and style should be also readable. Instructional materials should be aligned with learning objectives and assessment. Overall, having a clear system of organization helps clarify reading and assignment expectations, allows students to keep track of general coursework, and provides individual with a more effective and efficient experience.
So our next topic is about instructional material designs. It is instructional design refers to the process used to create instructional material. It is used to identify gaps in knowledge, skills, and attitudes of students or employees, analyzing learnings, needs, and developing learning materials to close to them. Instructional materials are the content or information conveyed within a course. This includes the lectures, readings, textbooks, multimedia components, and other sources in a course. These materials can be used in both face-to-face and online classroom. However, some must be modified or redesigned to be effective for the online environment. The best instructional materials are aligned with all the elements in the course, including the learnings, objectives, assessments, and activities. So what does it mean? Instructional materials are the tools used in educational lessons. which include active learning and assessments. So basically, any resource or teacher uses to help him or teach his students is an instructional material. There are many types of instructional materials, but let's look at some of the most common ones. So there are three types of instructional design. First, traditional resources. Second, graphic organizer. And third is the teacher-made resources.
So, what is traditional resources? Traditional resources includes textbook and workbooks used in the classroom. It is a reading materials which are written or printed like books, or a story that children love to read. That is the example of traditional resources. The second one is graphic organizer. So what is graphic organizer? Graphic organizer, a second type of instructional material, is the graphic organizer, which is any type of visual representation of information. It is a visual tools that make pictures of our thoughts that we can or the children can easily get an idea by looking at the graphic organizer. And the third one is teacher-made resources. So what is teacher-made resources? The teacher-made resources, it compromises any teacher-made resources. This includes anything that teacher creates like handouts, worksheets, tests, quizzes, and projects. So, teacher-made resources, it is a constructed teaching materials to be able the learners or the students get the idea easily by looking at the teacher-made resources or the teacher create and handouts. That all the three types of instructional materials.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Charlie Jr. De Ebio, and I'm going to discuss the instructional material development. So, what is instructional material development? Actually, instructional material design and instructional material development goes hand in hand because the development of the instructional material is actually dependent to the design that is being created, considering the curriculum, the different learning competencies for the learner. So let us first understand what is instructional material development. So instructional material development, actually you create the instructional material to be given. So instructional material is anything that can facilitate or increase the learning of the teacher, or it can be used by the teacher for the learning of the students or learners. This can be existing, or you are going to create your own. So here are some things to consider, or the technicalities when it comes in creating the instructional material or developing an instructional material. So we must consider first the purpose. So are we going to use it as an instruction, as an assessment for the children? So these two, when it comes to purpose, is very important na when it comes sa development ng instructional material, it's very important that we know the purpose of developing it. Next is the format. It can be written in a written form. Since we are in the blended learning, this can be digitalized or animated. So those are things na pwede rin natin consider. We can also consider creator, or like we can borrow that is already existing, or being instructional materials that already used, or we can create our own. So here are some elements in that we must consider in creating or developing an instructional material. First is the text, and under that is the font style. So we must choose the appropriate font style that is readable and appropriate to the audience or the readers. Next is the font style. Should not be too small and not that too big font size. Just enough for the, especially when it comes to elementary students, enough for them to read it. And emphasis, there are subheadings, subtopics, and topics, and instructions that should be emphasized. So you must use the proper way in emphasizing this part of the instructional material. Next, of course, having an instructional material, developing it, there are graphics, images, pictures, graphs that will be put in instructional material. So we must consider under the graphics is the color. We should not use black and white, and we will challenge the student to identify what color is being or seen in the image. So if it is if need siya na colored, then yung sa instructional material natin should be colored. And yung size din ng graphics, hindi dapat din masyadong maliit. Not that too big na masyado nang ma-occupy yung paper or yung instructional material. Should be appropriate sa audience. Like, in us, elementary students should be as big as possible that they can see the details of the graphics. Third is animation. This is for the digitalized instructional materials or learning materials. Like what I've said earlier, we are in the blended learning where we use the online world, or we enter the online world and use different platforms to produce our instruction, our discussions, and lesson to our learners. So we should use the proper animation, not that too fancy, the animation, just enough to gain the attraction of the students, the learners, especially elementary students. They love animated images, but not that too fancy, just like what I've said. Next is audio clips. There are teachers who release audio clips or send it via messenger or via messenger. So it is very important na if we are going to use music, should be appropriate. The narration or the proper or the place where you are going to record the audio should be in the quiet place, or there's no noise that going to bother or going to interrupt in the discussion. Also, the effects and the sound should be appropriate also, not that too many sound effects, just according to the what is needed in the context of what kind of audio you are going to produce. Next, video clips. There are these interviews, demonstration, and raw footage. It is very important that when in creating the video clips or recording just like this, what I am doing should be in its very clear visual presentation. Or if you are going to use PowerPoints, the font size should not be, we're going back to just what I've said earlier. It should be readable and naiintindihan ng manonood. And as much as possible, the video should not be blurry. So those are the elements that we need to consider in developing an instructional material. So that's all. Thank you.